you're watching Al24 News World News Program. I'm your host, Melissa Noor Jimenez, and to the headlines. Africa refuses to be the battleground for a proxy war between nations on opposite sides of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia and Ukraine carry out an unexpected prisoner swap on Wednesday involving nearly 300 military prisoners. Also coming up, improvised demonstrations against the partial mobilization for the offensive in Ukraine take place in at least 38 cities in Russia. Cambodia's UN-backed Khmer Rouge tribunal rejects the appeal of a genocide conviction by the communist group's last surviving leader. And Lebanese banks will remain shut indefinitely due to a lack of security protection by authorities. President of Senegal and chair of the African Union, Macky Sall, sent a direct message to his fellow world leaders that Africa does not want to be the battleground for a proxy war between nations on opposite sides of the Russia-Ukraine war. This was one of the highlights of his address at this year's UN General Assembly meeting in New York. AU President called for Africa to be given a seat in the G20 in order to attain a more inclusive global governance.
I reiterate the request to grant the African Union a seat in the G20 so that Africa can be implemented where decisions are taken that affect 1,400,000,000 Africans. The time has come for a just global governance that is more adapted to the realities of our time. It is time to realize Africa's just and legitimate demand for Security Council reform.
Tel que reflété dans le consensus d'Iselweni.
In response to the false claims and fabrications made by Morocco regarding Western Sahara, the Algerian delegation, taking part in the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, emphasized that the legal nature of the Saharan issue has been and will continue to be one of the decolonization so that the Sahrawi people can exercise their right. The Algerian delegation commented on the roundtable process used by the kingdom, saying that Morocco had used it to promote its colonial strategy, circumvent international legitimacy, and change the nature of the conflict from a decolonization issue to a bilateral one, rendering it useless and ineffective.
Following the statement made by the representative of Morocco and their allegations, as well as unfortunate attempts to exploit this restaurant to spread propaganda and lies regarding what's happening in Western Sahara. In its connection, my country's delegation would like to reaffirm the following. Firstly, as regards the legal nature of the conflict in Western Sahara, this question has always been an issue of decolonization, so that the people of Western Sahara can exercise their alienable right to self-determination, and this through a free integral referendum. And UN resolutions since this conflict has been on the UN's agenda according to General Assembly Resolution 1514 and 1541. These resolutions also clearly set forth that the two nations of the conflict, Morocco and Polisario Front, considered as unique and single representative of the people of Western Sahara.
Exports from Spain to Algeria have experienced a historic drop since the beginning of the African country's boycott of Spanish companies after Pedro Sánchez tune over Western Sahara. The data from the Secretary of State for Commerce published this Tuesday indicate that the sales of Spanish companies to Algeria have plummeted 81% in July, 71% if we also consider the month of June when the blockade formally began. Russia and Ukraine carried out an unexpected prisoner swap on Wednesday involving nearly 300 military prisoners. Ukraine authorities said that they handed over 55 Russian prisoners in return for 215 Ukrainian prisoners from Russia in an unexpected exchange. Released prisoners include officers, fighter pilots, and high-profile commanders, such as those who defended the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. The deal, hammered out with the help of Saudi Arabia and Turkey, had been under preparation for some time and involved intense haggling.
I believe that is a really great victory. So many people released without revealing all secrets. We returned 200 people. We returned a little more in total. We will see our boys from another group. In general, I can say that we could exchange Medvedchuk for one of our Azov heroes. But we have returned so many people. Today there is something to celebrate for the country.
10 prisoners of war, including 5 British and 2 Americans, were transferred from Russia to Saudi Arabia as part of an exchange between Moscow and Ukraine, favored by Saudi mediation. This transfer of prisoners was announced on Wednesday by the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Improvised demonstrations against the partial mobilization for the offensive in Ukraine took place in at least 38 cities in Russia. These are the largest protests in the country since those following the announcement of Moscow's offensive in Ukraine in late February. More than 1,300 people were arrested during the demonstrations. In a pre-recorded speech, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky told the United Nations on Wednesday that his country is seeking just punishment for the crimes Russia has committed in invading the former Soviet state. Hossein Berkan has the details.
On the same day that Russian President Vladimir Putin opened a new phase of the war by ordering the partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists and threatening the use of nuclear weapons, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, addressed the international community and denounced the Russian invasion and the destruction it has caused, and demanded that the rest of the world must punish Moscow.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations.
While many delegations gave Zelensky a standing ovation after his speech, the Russian representatives remained motionless in their seats. In a highly anticipated speech, US President Joe Biden criticized Moscow for making irresponsible nuclear threats and warned Putin that nuclear wars cannot be won. Biden added that Washington is ready to enforce arms control measures.
A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Russia shunned the non-proliferation ideals embraced by every other nation at the 10th NPT Review Conference. And again today, as I said, they're making irresponsible nuclear threats to use nuclear weapons.
In all their speeches, Ukraine and its Western allies kept accusing Russian forces of committing war crimes in different parts of the country they have occupied. Russia denied all the allegations and said it has not targeted civilians.
EU High Representative for Foreign Policy Josep Borrell said on Wednesday evening that the EU27 were considering new sanctions against Russia. Mr. Borrell made this statement after a special meeting of EU foreign ministers in New York.
Additional restrictive measures against Russia will be brought forward immediately, as soon as possible, in coordination with our partners. The European Union reiterates its stronger condemnation of the plans to organize illegal referenda with the aim of the annexation by Russia of parts of Donetsk, Kherson, and Luhansk, and Zaporizhia regions. These are the areas of Ukraine currently occupied by the Russian army.
North Korea says it has not exported any weapons to Russia during the war in Ukraine and has no plans to do so, saying U.S. intelligence reports of the arms transfer were misleading in an attempt to tarnish its image. An unspecified North Korean defense official told the United States to stop spreading an intriguing humor and to keep quiet. Cambodia's UN-backed Khmer Rouge tribunal Thursday rejected the appeal of a genocide conviction by the Communist group's last survivor leader. The historic international court issued its ruling on an appeal by Khieu Samphan, who served as head of state in Cambodia's 1975-1979 Khmer Rouge government. He was convicted in 2018 of genocide over killings of the country's Vietnamese minority during that period. French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna co-chairs a meeting on security in the Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea-Bissau or Guinea with her counterpart Carla Barbosa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guinea-Bissau at the United Nations in New York. Catherine Colonna also emphasized on strengthening economic and social partnership as well as establishing, new forms of cooperation between France and African countries in the Sahel region. Let's take a listen.
We clearly want to continue our engagement with our African partners as much as they would like. So in support of their requests and according to their needs, and with respect, it goes without saying, for their sovereignty. These actions must be complemented by a strengthened partnership development component. I think it must be said, and with greater emphasis on new forms of cooperation involving civil societies and youth. Not just youth, but I think we're working for future generations, so I want to quote youth first.
Yemen's Houthis staged a big military parade on Wednesday in the capital, Sana'a, displaying its weapons and equipment, including missiles, drones and helicopters. A total of 35,000 participants from the Army, Navy and Air Force joined the parade.
The military parade indicates the development of military capabilities, from drones to warplanes, which now participate in the parade. If the coalition does not understand these messages, there will be other advanced capabilities that the coalition cannot support.
Lebanese banks will remain shut indefinitely due to a lack of security protection by authorities, according to their association. Lebanon is in a severe economic crisis, with more than 80% of the population struggling to afford food and medicine. Banks have limited withdrawals of dollars since 2019, when the value of the Lebanese pound plummeted and inflation soared. Meanwhile, Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati said his country was working on a financial and economic recovery plan on Wednesday while addressing the United Nations Assembly.
In the context of efforts to address the economic crisis, our government is also working on a financial and economic recovery plan that complements our cooperation with the International Monetary Fund, and we are also working on a package of comprehensive, structural and sectoral reforms that meet the requirements of the Lebanese people.
The Syrian government has announced 23 deaths and more than 250 infections of cholera in 6 provinces. That is due to a mixing of waste water with drinking water, as well as snow made of contaminated water. The World Health Organization is working to strengthen surveillance to identify cases, give patients the appropriate treatment, and track the infected and their contacts.
All the tests carried out in our laboratories and those of the World Health Organization have proved the presence of Vibrio cholerae, responsible for the cholera, in the waters of Euphrates. This is due to the fact that the Euphrates has been trapped and its level has dropped considerably, creating swamps in many areas.
The Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria will get some high-powered help this week to reach its $18 billion goal to fund another 3 years to slow the spread of these diseases. Zara Farjani reports.
The Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria said that it had raised $14.2 billion at its 7th replenishment conference in New York on Wednesday. The goal is to reach $18 billion target, set to end these deadly diseases by 2030. The event was held on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in the presence of US President Joe Biden, who pledged $6 billion from the United States and hailed the extraordinary contributions.
The United States will donate $1 billion for every $2 billion committed by the rest of the world. That means we're going to work with our partners in Congress to contribute another $6 billion to the Global Fund.
It was the largest bailout ever requested by the organization in an economic context complicated by COVID-19 pandemic and the food and energy crises caused by the war in Ukraine.
Now is the moment to accelerate our efforts to reduce health inequities and to address barriers to access, including gender and human rights barriers, to build a more inclusive healthcare systems, to leave no one behind, to end AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria for good.
France allocated an additional 300 million euros to the Global Fund over the next 3 years to reach the total of 1.6 billion between 2023 and 2025.
Victory against the great pandemics is within our reach, but we still have a long way to go. 38.4 million people are still living with AIDS and malaria and tuberculosis infections are on the rise in Africa, the Middle East and Latin America. These are the realities we must face up to.
The total of $18 billion requested represented 30% more than what was raised at the last replenishment conference held in France in 2019.
The US Federal Reserve on Wednesday enacted the third consecutive three-quarter point rate hike as it continues to ramp up its fight against inflation. The Federal Open Market Committee, the Fed's policy-setting body, decided to raise the target range for the federal funds rate from 3 to 3.25% and anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range would be appropriate. Fed Chair Jerome Powell gave an update on the central bank's economic outlook and forecast for future rate hikes.
Restoring price stability will likely require maintaining a restrictive policy stance for some time. The historical record cautions strongly against prematurely loosening policy. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. We will keep at it until we're confident the job is done.
After Ecuador's authorities confirmed the death of a woman lawyer who disappeared more than a week ago, outraged Ecuadorians gathered on Wednesday outside the National Police building in Quito to protest the death of Maria Bellin. After she entered a police training school, Maria was missing for many days. Government said that she was killed by her police officer husband. Meanwhile, the national government offered a public apology to the family of Maria Bellin.
I also want to say that the Ministry of Interior, the national government, expresses its most profound apology to the Ecuadorian society, especially the family, and offers a public apology to the family of Maria Bellin, especially to her mother Elizabeth Otavalo and her grandson Isaac.
Over 1,000 people gathered across Australia on Thursday to protest the National Day of Mourning for Queen Elizabeth II, calling for more Indigenous rights. In Sydney, protesters gathered at Sydney Town Hall and marched through the central business district, denouncing the monarchy and the impact of British colonisation on First Nations people.
The monarchy represents everything that's wrong with the world today. The fact that a group of unelected, born-to-rule people get to live in gold-plated palaces while the rest of us can't even afford heating during the winter. So I think that's why we need to be out here today.
She signed during her time of reign was, if you go back through the legal documents and all the documents that incarcerated our people, it was her signature that was on them. And so she's not innocent in no way, shape or form.
Countries within the European Union have invested a total of close to 500 billion euros to tackle their energy crisis and alleviate the following impacts on their residents. Sofiane Kantouri tells us more.
The rise in energy prices caused by the Ukraine conflict pushed European countries to look for measures to cope with the crisis amid growing pressures. The European Union as a whole has committed close to 5 billion euros to solving their energy crisis and minimizing the following effects on their citizens.
Nun ist eine
Crisis intervention is now necessary to secure our gas supply in Germany economically and to protect consumers from an uncontrollable situation. That's why the state now has a temporary stake in the Uniper company and has now taken it over, in large part because of the enormous increase in economic risks there, which would no longer have been borne privately.
The continuous worsening European energy crisis has pushed up energy prices, seriously affecting people's livelihood and production activities and causing widespread concerns.
Electricity prices are more than 4 times what they used to be, and this is also a problem for the entire Europe.
Energy bill in an average Italian family, mainly for gas and electricity, jumped to 5% of total household expenses by July 2022, from 3.5% in 2019. This rise in energy prices has shut down production and cut back the competitiveness of Italy's manufacturing.
We can see that energy costs have already influenced the competitiveness of our products. To offset the increase in energy costs, the prices of our products need to go up accordingly. We're no longer competitive in the international market compared with other regions.
The largest economy in the bloc, Germany, has invested more than 100 billion euros since the crisis began, compared to Italy's investment of just over 59 billion. Estonia, on the other hand, has only set aside 200 million euros.
And now for more world news, let's follow this report.
Minister of Finance announced that Hong Kong is preparing to end the year in recession as the city's economy is suffering the consequences of anti-COVID restrictions and rising interest rates.
Firefighters are engaged in a time trial to control the spread of forest fires in remote areas of the Brazilian state of Amazonas, while experiencing difficulties due to poor road conditions, heat, smoke, and heavy equipment.
20 fire engines and around 125 firefighters tackled a large fire, ripping through several warehouses in an East London industrial estate. Residents have been advised to keep their doors and windows closed due to the smoke, and road closures are in place in the local area.
Mali celebrates the anniversary of its independence from France. The celebrations on Mali Republic Day are filled with festive activities, speeches and even parades, the grandest of which occur in the city of Bamako.
Italy is still plagued by poverty and joblessness, which is seen the hardest in years. Many families struggle with the cost of living. Giorgia Meloni vowed to end poverty if she wins Sunday's election. However, many voters in the southern region fear things could get worse. Islam Seed reports.
Poverty and unemployment levels are increasing in southwestern Italy, and the situation could get worse as winter approaches, especially in the Campania region. In Salerno, many people have to rely on the Caritas soap kitchen because they do not have enough money to pay their rent, bills and food.
I have a very small pension. I pay my rent, I pay my electricity bill, and I have nothing left for food. That's the situation.
A recent study indicates that 1 in 13 people is at risk of extreme poverty. The whole province and the city of Salerno itself are facing a particularly complicated situation after the pandemic and the war.
As the general election approaches in Italy, many voters in the country's south feel they have been abandoned by successive governments in recent years. Despite promises of far-right leader Giorgia Meloni to abolish poverty if she wins, many people fear things will only get worse.
If Meloni wins and cancels the citizenship income, there will be an influx of people here.
I don't know if I'm going to vote or who am I going to vote for. I have until Sunday to decide.
Based on recent government study, in 2021 there were more migrants and refugees in Italy who had found employment. The labor market participation of immigrants and refugees increased and is currently quite similar to pre-pandemic levels. However, more immigrant households are now struggling to make ends meet.
Now to a reminder of our top stories. Africa refuses to be the battleground for a proxy war between nations on opposite sides of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia and Ukraine carry out an unexpected prisoner swap on Wednesday involving nearly 300 military prisoners. Improvised demonstrations against the partial mobilization for the offensive in Ukraine take place in at least 38 cities in Russia. Cambodia's UN-backed Khmer Rouge tribunal rejects the appeal of a genocide conviction by the communist group's last surviving leader. And Lebanese banks will remain shut indefinitely due to a lack of security protection by authorities. Well, that's it for today's World News. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you for watching and goodbye.